Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the monthly Reproaction Act and Learn webinar. Tonight's topic is Do-It-Yourself Action Planning for Activists. This is going to be like a training, so we're very excited you're here. These are your hosts. This is me speaking, Erin Matson on the left. I'm based in Arlington, Virginia, and I will turn it over to Pamela.
Thank you so much, Erin. So I'm Pamela Merritt, and I'm the other co-director of Reproaction, and I'm based in St. Louis, Missouri. So let's go over our agenda for this evening. We're going to do an introduction of Reproaction for those of you who have not attended our webinars in the past. Then we're going to go over forms of engagement and action, 10 steps for effective action, direct action in the media, then next steps, and then we'll finish up with some Q&A if we have time. The hashtag for live tweeting, and we do encourage everybody to live tweet tonight, is #Reproaction. So what is Reproaction? Reproaction is a new direct action group forming to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. We're proud of our left flank analysis. We have a willingness and a commitment to hold folks on all sides accountable, be they allies or the opposition. And of course, we have a commitment to nonviolent direct action. I'll hand it over to Erin.
Great, and so thanks so much, Pamela. So super excited to go through this with y'all tonight. First of all, I just want to let you know, feel free to type in any questions that you have into the chat window. We will get to them at the end during Q&A. So let's talk a bit about engaging for social change and what that looks like. What I have here is a downwards arrow to show that it's a progression. That often in a campaign, for example, you'll want to escalate over time. So the first group of things that we can do when we're engaging for social change is something that you can think of as show. It's education, conversation. So those are things like meetings, panels, community forums, blogs, most hashtags, things that are usually called building awareness. So I want this to be an interactive presentation. So what I'd love for you to do is type in an example of an education or conversation activity or event that you have participated in before. And Pamela will read some of those off. Feel free to just do one. You can pick your favorite if you've done several. I'll give an example. I participated in the Why I Stayed hashtag on Twitter. It was a hashtag started by Beverly Gooden, an advocate and domestic violence survivor, and I ultimately made the decision to share my own story about domestic violence. It was very powerful to see that solidarity, and it started a new conversation after the horrific Ray Rice videos were released. Pamela, do you want to share anything of your own, and are we getting some comments in?
We're not getting comments in just yet, so I urge folks to go ahead, and your control panel, the GoToWebinar control panel, has a tab that allows you to type questions and comments. So I'll share that I have certainly participated in several awesome hashtag actions, but one of my favorite actions was the first one I did was actually a boycott, and it was at the time, this was in the 80s, a Pepsi boycott, so it was a lot of fun. And even though I wasn't a big Pepsi drinker, it was a very deliberate way to participate and show that we were upset with their diversity hiring practices. So Erin, we actually have some examples that have popped up. So Melissa participated in Shout Your Abortion, which was an awesome hashtag action. And Tara presenting panels at medical conferences on respecting choice in childbirth.
Awesome. Thanks for those examples, everyone. So now, education and conversation is often where you want to start when you're working on an issue and working towards social change. The next step, oftentimes that's not enough, merely to show. You need to ask. So that gets into things that involve persuasion or pressure. So that would be meetings with asks. Note that's different than meetings under education conversation. For example, I know that I've gone many times to meet with legislative staff just to build relationships on the local level, which has helped later when I had specific asks about bills. Those specific asks about bills, when you're asking someone to do something, that would go under persuasion or pressure. There's also things like email or letter campaigns, lobby days, call-in campaigns, petitions, and most rallies. So again, I'd love for folks to pick your favorite type of persuasion or pressure event that you have participated in, or it doesn't have to be your favorite, just one if you want to share with the group. An example that I'll give that I'm very proud of is recently Reproaction led a petition to Congresswoman and DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz after she did an interview in the New York Times where she blamed young women for their complacency. That was a direct quote, following Roe v. Wade. And we launched a Dear Debbie hashtag where young people were sharing the work they do toward abortion and abortion access and reproductive justice, and also collected a petition with comments asking her to never make comments like that again. She did, in fact, walk back from what she initially said. We hand-delivered that petition and some copies of those tweets. So I was very proud of that, and I will pass it over to Pamela to share anything she'd like to, as well as what's coming in on the chat.
Sure thing. I'll just add that my favorite type of persuasion is when we have like face-to-face meetings with somebody, and that we're able to make a direct ask. So lobby days and any kind of town hall meeting. I love that stuff. So we are getting awesome stuff in from folks who are attending. So Kirsten said her favorite persuasion event was a pressure hashtag against former state rep John Deal in Missouri called What's the Deal? And he spelled his last name D-I-E-H-L, to tell him to bring Missouri Non-Discrimination Act to the floor for a vote. That was awesome, Kirsten, and I actually participated in that hashtag a bit. Jessica created a petition to ban a fraternity on campus that was notorious for drugging and raping women on our college campus. That is powerful stuff. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Jessica. Melissa shares that SCOTUS looking forward to next week in Black Lives Matter rallies. Yes, definitely. Steph shares that persuasion meetings behind the scenes educating journalists how their language unintentionally might stigmatize abortion. That is so important and such a crucial part of our work. Thank you, Steph.
Great. And so finally, often we'll need to escalate into direct action. So that includes things like strikes, boycotts, bird dogging, hunger strikes, and changing our physical surroundings. Direct action could encompass some rallies, although most rallies would really fall under persuasion and pressure. We will have some definitions of direct action in the following couple slides, so I want to let you know that's coming. I'm sure there's questions about that. People often ask, oh, Reproaction is a direct action organization. What does that mean? We'd love to provide you with that. Just for now, I'd love to encourage anyone to type in any examples of direct action that they've participated in. I'll give one. So Target, I lived in Minneapolis for many years, and Target is headquartered there. Target has this nasty policy where it allows its pharmacists to refuse to dispense emergency contraception. It's specific. It's an interesting policy, unlike many stores that allow their pharmacists to deny any prescription. Target specifically singles out emergency contraception, just in case you weren't sure it was about discrimination. And so Target did these events in downtown Minneapolis called the Holidazzle Parade. This thing was really quite a sight to explain it to everyone. So people dress up in Christmas lights, like these full suits of, and they look like elves and nutcrackers, and there's Santa, and floats, and it's huge. And so in a couple blocks in between Target headquarters and Target's flagship downtown Minneapolis store, we hijacked the Holidazzle parade and actually wore lights and wreaths and Christmas hats, and brought our own picket signs, and joined the parade and distributed information to contact the president and CEO of Target at the time and demand end to that policy. I include that as a direct action because it is an example of changing your physical surroundings. Are we getting any examples, Pamela, of direct action that folks on the line have participated in?
Not yet.
Okay, that's just fine. And we can move right along, but basically, in terms of this progression, thinking about showing, then asking, and demanding. You don't want to just simply move to direct action. It doesn't make sense to start there. You want to start by building knowledge and really amping up the pressure. And usually, direct action is a choice of last resort when all other options have failed. So with that, I'm going to move to a couple definitions of direct action. What is direct action? Here's an example from Beautiful Trouble, and this is a wonderful website. It's just beautifultrouble.org with all sorts of free tips and training opportunities for direct action. They define it as direct action means that we take collective action to change our circumstances without handing our power to a middle person. So a perfect example of this is when South Carolina was discussing whether or not to take down the Confederate flag from the State House. You had an activist who actually rose that flagpole and took it down. Another example of direct action, Gene Sharp is another thoughtful practitioner of direct action, and it's a great resource if anyone wants to dig deeper. He defines direct action as social, economic, or political action taken by people themselves acting directly, as by a strike. Direct action is contrasted with indirect action, such as an effort to get someone else to act in favor of one's group, as by lobbying for enactment of a new law, or an effort by leaders to persuade opponents to agree to an acceptable settlement, as by negotiation. So just something I want to highlight here, that lobbying is not direct action, that even elections are not necessarily direct action. And that's because we are putting people in place to act in our favor. So I want to be clear about this because I've talked about how we escalate from education to persuasion to direct action. I don't want this to seem hierarchical. You don't suck as an activist if you attend events or if you lobby but have never participated in direct action. You are still just as important of an activist. I want to highlight again that escalating over time is strategic, and it's better to get what you want earlier anyway. I also want to highlight that not every action is safe for every person. For a number of reasons, we know that direct action often literally means putting one's body on the line and being subject to arrest. We know that people of color are treated horrifically by police. That is just one example. Other times you may not feel safe doing an action for any reason. That's okay. Another thing I want to highlight is that within the same action, different people will have different roles. So even in, for example, arrestable actions, if you don't want to be arrested or it's not safe for you to be arrested, there are other roles to play, whether it's holding people's wallets or speaking with the media or helping with planning. So everyone will have different roles. Contribute what you can when you can as an activist. No activist burnout. And please try to avoid working with people who tell you otherwise, who try to make a hierarchy among activists, who say that you have to be this hardcore or you don't, or you're not being effective toward the cause. Every activist counts. So with that, I'm going to move toward 10 steps for effective action. We'll dig into each of these more deeply in subsequent slides, but just as an overview, the first thing is to know who you have and be welcoming. The second is to define the problem. The third is to pick your target and your ask. The fourth is to identify your allies. The fifth is to create strategy, then brainstorm tactics. The sixth is to understand local regulations. The seventh is to publicize your action. Then you'll want to prepare and wear your best game face for action day. You'll want to publicize your action offline after it's over, and then debrief and celebrate. So let's just dive right in. And again, feel free to type in any questions you have at any point into the chat box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. So first off step one is to know who you have and be welcoming. So if you're planning an action, you'll be working with a small group most likely. And my first tip is to celebrate what you've got, to know one another's skills, and remember that a small group can be mighty. Often I see folks getting stuck on, we've got to recruit more people before we can do anything. No, actually, some of the most effective actions I've done and participated in at a small core planning group, sometimes only 5 people or 3 people or 7 people. So celebrate what you have. And on that, knowing one another's skills, I actually want to take folks through an exercise. So what I want you to do is type in something you're good at, and nobody gets out of this one. This is really important, especially from a feminist point of view. I know we've got many women on the call, and often women are told not to toot our own horn. For this thing, just pick one skill you have that's useful for actions that people working with you should know. So if you were action planning, think that way. And I'll share first. One skill that I'm good at is de-escalation and blocking the other side from hijacking an action. Pamela, what are we getting in, and what are you good at?
Ooh, I'm good at crisis management and communication, and definitely finding water when we forgot to bring water to any action. Melissa is good at logistics. Sarah is good at proofreading written materials. Steph is good at being detail-oriented, thinking of all the logistics and details others might forget. Jessica is good at public speaking and getting crowd energy up. That's so important. Steph is also good at thinking about big picture strategy and bringing allies along. So important. Wendy is good at training and educating. Rebecca is good at building key relationships. So important. And Kirsten is good at getting petitions signed, educating and motivating those people.
This is awesome, everyone. Thank you so much. So, we got
one more, Erin. Tara is great at details.
Awesome. So I hope everyone feels the power on this line. And I find this is a really great exercise when you first sit down in a room with people. Have people share one thing they're good at. This does a number of things. First of all, it helps you be aware of your power and strength in the room. Second, it also encourages everyone to, participate and speak. We all have different conversational styles. Some people are more prone to jumping in than others. And so this is a way to make sure that you're drawing everyone out. So I'm also going to share some other tips to take steps to get input from others and be accessible in your planning. Invite people to join you. Don't let newcomers leave without a job. This is really important. One of the mistakes that I often see people who are doing actions or who are organizers, especially when they're getting started out, make is they want to prove that they can do it all. Actually, the best thing you can do as an organizer is to make sure that every single person has a job working on an action. Everyone should leave with one thing to do. Meeting spaces, be accessible in that way. Do people need to pay to be there? Be really cognizant of that. Even in things like coffee shops, if you have to pay to be there. Are you always meeting in spaces where alcohol is served? That is often cuts some people out. And then be inclusive. While not everyone may be able to take action in the same way, everyone can help somehow. So step 2 is to define the problem. So Well, it's okay to start large. For example, all these restrictions on abortion have got to go, right? You want to narrow down to something specific you can work on. So within that, here's some examples. Our local paper is quoting pro-life terrorists as reputable sources in stories on abortion bills before the legislature, something that's really happening where I live. Or the crisis pregnancy center in our town is pretending to provide medical care. So again, I would love for everyone to type in a specific reproductive justice concern in your community, or it could be something you see online as well that you'd like to work on. And just as something that you can use to kind of mentally then, as we go through the further steps, think about this in terms of how you'd apply it. So I'll just say right now, Obama and nominating someone to the Supreme Court to replace Justice Scalia. I took extreme concern today that the governor of Nevada, who's a Republican, Brian Sandoval, is being floated. He is being represented in the mainstream media as pro-choice, but in fact, this is someone who he may not want to overturn Roe v. Wade and go that far. He actually does support a number of abortion restrictions. So that's something that really scares me, a problem. Are we getting some other problems coming in, Pamela?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, but predictably we are. So staff shares that crisis pregnancy centers are advertising on the subway, especially on trains that reach low-income neighborhoods. Kirsten shares that mandatory waiting periods hurt so many intersecting identities from accessing their reproductive needs. Jamie, I believe, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name because that's horrible. Two local abortion clinics have closed down in a few years. Melissa, I want to end Hyde. I do too. And Jessica, Governor Kasich voted to defund Planned Parenthood.
Awesome. Those are great definitions of problems. They're not great problems. They're terrible problems, but I like how you're all being very specific. That is a key to coming up with an action. So step 3 is to pick your target and your ask. So you need an ask for every single target. So what do you want them to do? So often there are multiple possible targets, right? There are direct influencers who can make the change. So in this instance, for instance, you might say, let's go with the subway example. The transit authority could make the change and stop running those advertisements. But then you also have indirect influencers who can convince or otherwise can change conditions for a direct influencer. So maybe it's concerned parents in the community might influence the direct influencer. And when you choose a direct versus an indirect, often politically, you have a better shot at having a direct influence on someone who is nominally on your side. Whereas you may be more prone or maybe more successful using an indirect influencer. For example, if you're targeting a very conservative person who loudly trumpets themselves as pro-life, you might have better success influencing someone who can influence them if they won't listen to you. So after you've brainstormed with your group, you'll want to pick a direct target and define what you want them to do. It's also a good idea to pick a secondary target and define what you want them to do. So brainstorm all of the possible targets for your problem and then pick your primary and your secondary. Okay, the next step is to identify your allies. Who are people you want to participate in your action, and who do you want to be supportive of your action? Of course, this doesn't mean that you need to be seeking everyone's approval, but you should think strategically about, what can I do to make sure that this action is accessible to the people I want to be there? For example, if you really want students to participate in a rally, it's not a good idea to schedule the rally at 11 a.m. when a number of them are in class, okay? Same thing goes for who do you want to be supportive of your action. You want to make sure that For example, that your action isn't inaccessible to close people's minds who might otherwise be sympathetic. All right. So step 5 is to create your strategy, then brainstorm tactics. If there is one thing I want you to remember from this webinar, it is that you should never declare your tactic and run. One of the worst things you can do is run into a meeting and say, let's shut down a street corner. Well, wait a minute. You really need to walk back and do your strategy. So create a strategy. What will move your target to resolve the problem while leveraging and not alienating your allies? What can you accomplish? Know that some problems may require campaigns with escalating actions, for example, repealing Hyde, while others may just require one-off actions. For example, when we had our petition to Debbie Wasserman Schultz after her comments about young women. Brainstorming. So this is where it's fun, because once you have a strategy in place, you can brainstorm tons of tactics. So one thing that I want to do is make sure that you allow everyone to speak. Know what everyone does well, which you should have already done, and be good and proactively draw that out. I mean, I like to think of this as just be a feminist, please. You know, if someone hasn't spoken, it's a great idea if you're moderating a meeting to say, hey, you know what, Jane, we haven't heard from you yet. What do you think? That's a great thing to do. Okay, so step 6 is to understand your local regulations. So do you need a permit? What is the local ordinance about being on the sidewalk or where you'll be? So for example, this is something that you can look up with your local law enforcement. But a special note here for federal targets, they may have their own jurisdiction in addition to the local police. Like, for example, in the Washington, D.C. area where I'm based, you have Supreme Court Police, you have Capitol Police, you have National Park Service, you have D.C. local police, so it varies. But, you know, it's a good thing to look into your local regulations and also find out what you can do without a permit. In many places, and you need to verify this in your local area, if you are physically walking on a sidewalk, you can do whatever you want as long as you're not obstructing other people. Another thing to think about is, are you on campus or on private property? Often campus police have their own policies and procedures posted online. My word of caution and pro tip is that in my experience, hired security or private security is much stricter and more difficult to work with than the police. Don't be afraid to call or meet with law enforcement and ask questions. You know, the way to plan an action well is to feel free to go in and say, you know what, walk me through this from soup to nuts. It's okay to say, I've never done this before, but I really want to have a rally. Please help me. Okay, so the next step is to publicize your action. And before I go through this, I'd love to open this up and have everyone type in something that you found really works for publicizing an action. I'll kick it off. I found that Facebook events are something that you definitely want to have. So one example with this was we did a Reproaction hosted a vigil to stop pro-life harassment and terrorism outside the Supreme Court shortly after the awful tragedy and terrorism in Colorado Springs when 3 people were murdered by a pro-life gunman. And that was something that we were able to organize quickly by putting it on a public Facebook event. That's a wonderful place to publicize things. So Pamela, are we getting some input here of people's favorite way to publicize an action?
Not yet, but so I'll go ahead and toss out one of my favorite ways to publicize an action is actually, I guess, kind of a reboot of the old school coffee shop postings, but notice that my favorite local coffee shops have Facebook pages, and they also have usually have a way to publicize and post to Facebook. And I've actually even had them retweet things. So it's, you know, once you get a good relationship with a local haunt, they have a good habit of pushing that out to folks. So it's kind of like what we used to do to a bulletin board. You can also do online. And then Kim, Kim wants to know where she could learn or he could learn more about Facebook events. Had never heard of this. So do you want to just talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So this is just merely on Facebook. You can create an event. You can do it from a personal Facebook page or a group Facebook page if you have an organizational account. And it's simply like it's the same thing that people do sometimes for parties or social things, but Facebook events, when you put them public and ask people to share, it's a great way to get people there.
Awesome. And then Melissa wanted to say that asking for a shout out at other events is a good idea. So if you're at a like-minded event, you could ask the event organizers to mention your event as well.
Great. That's awesome. That's so smart.
And Jessica wanted to mention that using humor at a rally on campus helped gather one of the largest crowds in Ohio University history, titled it the Bat Rally to protest the president getting a new house since his was infested with bats. So they dressed up as bats and made jokes, and that would definitely influence the attendance. That's hilarious.
That's awesome. Creativity is so helpful in success. So in publicizing your action, in addition to what everyone said, I want to highlight that in addition to using social media, things like blogs, Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, all of your favorite sites, it's a good idea to get personal commitments from as many people as you can with personal messages. So in your organizing group, it's a great idea to assign responsibility to everyone in your group to bring a certain number of people. Even if it's small, I'll bring one friend with me. That's great. It's old school, but flyers and newspaper calendar items work, so feel free to use them. And another thing to do, and we'll dig into this a little more soon with direct action and the media tips, but for now, I'll just highlight that it's a good idea to write a press release and send it to local and or beat reporters who cover your issue. It's really helpful to make an effort to understand and reference their work first. So for example, you can then you're not just sending a plain press release, but you're saying, hey, I see that you've been covering this crisis pregnancy center in our community. Would you be interested in learning more about this specific action that we're hosting? Okay, so step 8 is to prepare and wear your best game face for Action Day. You can't overdo this. Check out the site in advance if you'll be physically demonstrating or even just hand delivering a petition. A site visit is one of the best things that you can do to make sure that you're prepared. Assign roles to folks in advance. Who will talk to the media? Who will talk to police? Who will greet newcomers? Who will live tweet? Who will take pictures and post video after it's over? All these things, think through it with the group. Be friendly but firm with your targets if you see your targets. And be flexible and adapt to your situation as needed. And then once your action is over, publicize your action online. And my recommendation is to put as much intensity into publicizing the action online after it's taken place as you do into the action when it's actually live, whether the action was either online or offline or both. So, you make use of YouTube or photographs or blog roundups or Storifys if you did a Twitter action, because putting your action online amplifies its message, but it also encourages others to take similar actions in their community. So it's really important. It shouldn't be an afterthought. And then finally, debrief and celebrate. This is really important. Do this when it's fresh. Don't wait a month. Meet with your folks and talk through what went well and what did we learn for next time. And then what are the next steps for the groups, regardless of success or failure. And then also party in gratitude. Make sure that you honor the work that you did. So in the spirit of that, I know that we're a little bit over time, but I want to encourage folks to type in something you've learned through the process of participating in actions to keep doing and or stop doing or do differently based on an experience you had in an action. So I'll give 2 examples while folks are thinking of that. Something to keep doing. I found that it's really helpful to engage with the police. One of my favorite things to do when I show up for a picket or a demonstration is actually to walk up and introduce myself to law enforcement by name, shake their hand if they'll let me. I've had private security decline to do that because they were mad that we were there. But to also kind of reiterate my understanding of what's legally permissible, and also say, we'll try to stay right here. If we're not planning civil disobedience, I let them know we're not planning any civil disobedience. We're not trying to cause any trouble. If you have any concerns, please come to me. I found that that's something that really helps, especially when you have folks who are opposed to abortion showing up. It can be helpful to have law enforcement on your side. Of course, there are some actions where you might be strategically planning an arrest, and that would be very different. Something I do differently is I've learned the need to overplan. A perfect example of this is I had this amazing action planned for hijacking and getting a pro-choice sign on live TV, and I had it perfectly scripted. I had someone who was walking by where the cameras were. I was watching on TV, and we were texting each other for like 4 hours trying to figure out the perfect placement. But then the day that we showed up with our small group, some people who had traveled in town, they were actually filming from Miami instead. So I've learned that you can't over-prepare. You really have to. And I also share that in the spirit of you will learn things at actions where it's like, holy crap, we just totally. But there's, I have a former colleague who has this saying, there's no failure, just data. And, and
there you go.
Folks are sharing or that you want to share, Pamela?
I'm not seeing any examples pop up, but I will just share that one thing that I definitely learned from doing an action was to solicit feedback and advice from any kind of disability activists that I know, and I know several, but just that the structure of so many events, direct action events, doesn't factor in that people with disabilities also want to participate, and that we need to make sure that that we've made it possible for them to participate. So just factoring in kind of the logistics, but that's something to be a part of all of my action plannings going forward. That was a very important note I received during a debrief. Steph mentioned that to make sure to have any disagreements about strategy and tactics all sorted out before action day. Hear, hear. I've learned that one too.
Woo-wee, that sounds painful.
And then Melissa said it's important to delegate. Many people want to get involved but are unsure, unable to plan. It can be hard to let go of some of the work, but everyone wants to feel important. That is so true.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to pass it back to Pamela to go through some more tips for direct action in the media.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so let's dive right in. Direct action in the media. Before I dive into each point, the media giveth and the media taketh away. So I have worked as a communications director for an organization. I've also run communications for direct actions, and I can tell you that having media there is key and very important, and having media on your side, or at least understanding who is and isn't on your side, can make or break how a direct action is perceived. So we're going to go through a couple of points and some advice, and then feel free to drop any questions, points of clarification, or anything that you're a little unsure about. Drop those comments in, and then Erin will give those to me as we move along. So direct action in the media, make sure that you promote your action to the media through an event advisory. You can, most of the time, you can find out who the local media is, and that means the printed press, that means the broadcast press, and radio press. So you should be able to go onto their website and find their contact information, and you want to make sure that you're sending these releases through to the newsroom. In my experience, they want the email to go directly to the newsroom. If you have a relationship with the reporter, that's an additional touch that does not take the place of the event advisory, because if that reporter is busy, then you want to make sure that the newsroom who assign tasks for coverage actually have your event on their calendar. An event advisory is not a press release. It isn't a dissertation. You do not want to have too much information in there. You want the basic formal heading of who's sending the advisory, who the media contact is, and then you want to talk about why in a paragraph, exactly what you're doing and why. This is your elevator speech in the intro paragraph, and then the actual advisory is who, what, when, where, and whatever visuals or whatever point you want to make. And then at the bottom, you might want to drop something in about the coalition you're a part of, or about more about why. But you want somebody to pick it up off of the printout that's going to happen from the email, or to click on it and be able to basically skim to the important details. And when you email your event advisory, do not send it as an attachment. You want to drop the text into the email. It might seem a little silly, but believe it or not, people will simply delete those emails because you haven't dropped that in. You want to make follow-up phone calls to your media list to confirm who will be there. Even if they don't confirm that somebody will be there, I have found that they often will look through their advisories, and yours will move to the top. So you often won't get a commitment, but you want to go ahead and make those phone calls anyway. So if you send your advisory 48 hours or 24 hours before the event, then the morning of the event, or the day prior, you're going to call and say, I'm Pamela, I'm calling from Reproaction, just want to confirm that you received this. And if they say, yeah, I got it, then, and can you confirm that somebody's going to be there? You want to assign someone to wrangle the press at the action. This person's only responsibility is to look through the list of people you've confirmed are going to be there and make sure that they walk up to people who look like they're obvious press, and they will be lurking. They don't look like they're attending, so you ask them, confirm that they're from the press, and maybe hand them a release or some material, but say, let me know if you want to talk to somebody, if you want to do an interview. You want to have somebody who's the point person. A lot of reporters will not work with that person. They want to be able to free range, roam across the event. But once you've had that person assigned to wrangle the press, if you have, and you should, have people who have been set aside who are going to talk to the press, then that will allow that person to say, hey, this is Janie, and she's actually impacted by this water crisis. So you want to introduce, you want to get them prepared for that person to be their go-to person. You, as Erin mentioned earlier, you want to prioritize live retweets and coverage and post articles covering the event. If somebody drops an article about your event before it happens, reward that and retweet it from your organization and have people retweet it. If somebody from the press is tweeting about your event, you can live tweet it. It's not an opportunity to correct inaccuracies. You might want to reach out one-on-one for that, but know who's live tweeting, know who gave your event some coverage. And then after the event is over, Erin mentioned making sure that you publicize and then you show, like, you capture the event in Storify or on YouTube, and then you make sure that that gets out as well. You want to send a press release following the event, and often you can drop the Storify or pictures of the event or a YouTube video or audio into the press release for those reporters who weren't there. That press release is your opportunity to go into detail, where you're going to have that intro, and then if you have links, you want to put detail in there. You want to have an awesome quote. Usually it's better to have a quote from somebody impacted by what your action is about than to have a quote from somebody who's from an organization. All right. Any questions so far, Erin?
Nope.
Awesome. I mean, not awesome, but we'll just motor right along. So you want to make sure that you know who is authorized to talk to the press. As somebody mentioned earlier in one of their questions, you want to go through the logistics and the strategy. This is part of your event planning discussion. Who's authorized to talk to the press? You want to identify supporters who can tell a personal story that helps define the ask. So you want to do that, again, when you're planning the event. Make sure that they know where to be and that they know to linger after the event, because they need to be available to the press. You need to take pictures and video of the event to share with media not in attendance. Many wise people who have been doing direct actions for years have said, and I believe, if you don't have a picture, it didn't happen. So you want somebody taking good pictures. You want to get crowd shots. You want to think about how the crowd looks during the action, both to the press and in these pictures. Like, is there a way for me to make this look big? Or is there a way for me to make this look beautiful or solemn or convey an emotion? Those are different things that you can think through as people show up. You want to know the media better than they know you. So know who the conservative outlets are. Know who the reporters are that just don't seem to get it. You want to know the reporters who have been sympathetic, and you want to know reporters who need guidance. Very often when a reporter messes something up, it's because they really just don't have the research departments they had 20 or 30 years ago. So you being a resource is an awesome way to build a relationship, and also identify in real time who you might need to walk over to and say, hey, I've noticed that you've written about crisis pregnancy centers, and I just wanted to let you know that the state of Missouri doesn't allow for there to be regulation of them. I've noticed that you haven't mentioned that. Is going to go a long way to helping build up a relationship. And then you want to make sure that volunteers know that nothing is off the record. A supporter, an attendee, passionate people need to understand, as you're prepping for the event, that reporters are never not going to capture something that you say. So if you're frustrated, if something doesn't go well, if you're angry, or even if you're despondent, that doesn't need to be said in front of the press, because that'll work its way into a story, and you'll be like, oh my God, we had a great event. The headline is some supporters disappointed by turnout. That doesn't need to be a conversation that happens in front of the press ever. Always follow up on errors in reporting or quotes. I'm going to go ahead and say, make sure you follow up in a way that makes that reporter want to talk to you ever again in life. So I try to be very positive and nice, unless the error is so glaring that they deserve somebody to jump on them. So if somebody says something outrageously wrong and horrible, then yeah, you need to jump on it. But if it's, like I said, if they're erroneously reporting about crisis pregnancy centers, or if they, we often have this happen in Missouri, where they'll describe the 72-hour emergency contraception as an abortifacient, you need to jump up on that and clarify it, but do it in a way that makes them grateful and thankful, and that they'll see you as a resource and not a roadblock, and certainly not somebody who's going to make them feel stupid. Practice your elevator speech. have at least one awesome quote that you're going to talk to the press about. If you've ever wondered why an organization's demands seem random or unspecific in an article, 9 times out of 10, it's because they went on and on and on when they were doing the interview. Repetition might seem a little weird, but I've actually listened to awesome interviews where the person basically said the same thing 4 different ways. And when I read the article, it was very clear exactly why they showed up and what their ask was and how they felt about the event. You should be able to explain why you're there in an elevator speech. So like the length of time it takes you to go up 5 floors in an elevator. And you should have at least one awesome quote, one way you talk about your action or your ask that a reporter would have to be silly to not drop into their article. Avoid rambling. This is a big problem for me, so I have to think about it all the time. Prepare for silence. Reporters are trained to use silence to get you to ramble. So it's one of the best tactics that I've ever seen, both in sales and certainly in reporting. So be prepared for long pauses and don't feel the need to fill those voids with the press. When you're done talking, stop talking. And think through ways to help reporters avoid bearing the lead. That means if you can think through how to help them get the money quote and get that top key takeaway into the top paragraph, help guide them up there and help guide them to that. The sole big takeaway from this event is that nobody who works full time should have to live in poverty. The reason that gets into so many articles about the Fight for 15 minimum wage strikes that happen is because those activists have an awesome ability to get that out there and stay on message. And that's my final point here, which is to stay on message online and on the ground. So how people tweet, the same rules that I just went through or suggestions I went through for how you deal with the press when you're face-to-face. When you're on Twitter, you're face-to-face. The press follows so many activists and so many organizations. So you want to make sure you stay on message because it'll work itself into an article.
Thanks, Pamela. That was awesome. So I just want to, we're almost up at time here, so I just want to encourage everyone to plug into Repro Action campaigns. Please, I'm like on my knees, arms in the air. Okay, I'm not on my knees, but my knee is bent up at the computer, and my arms really are waving in the air. I am shouting, please sign up for our email list if you haven't already at reproaction.org. That's the best way to make sure you don't miss a single thing. Also follow us on social media. We are Reproaction on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Also save the date for our next webinar. It's going to be on Tuesday, March 22nd, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern. Our topic is going to be showing up in the progressive movement, how to be a better ally. And we run these Act and Learn webinars every single month. So feel free, if you have any suggestions of topics, feel free to email us after the webinar or chat those in. We want to make sure these are impactful and useful and resonate with what you need. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Pamela for any final questions or comments that folks have.
Thank you very much, Erin. So at this time, if you do have questions or comments that you want to share with the group, feel free to drop those into the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will take them one by one. I'm not seeing any comments, so while we wait just for a second for people to type those in, Erin, do you have any personal story or anything you'd like to share about a good interaction that you had during a direct action with the press?
Oh, that's great. So I think with one interaction with the press that I'm really quite proud of is there's so many that come to mind. But when I was outside the Supreme Court around the Hobby Lobby decision, there was a huge crowd there. There were, of course, protesters there, even though we're talking about birth control and they're conflating birth control with abortion because facts, who needs them? They had much less their distorted graphic imagery. I was actually walking over while they were trying to bombard the press with these distorted, awful images. And I was standing there proudly with my sign and about birth control and its value. And I was smiling and I was blocking them. And because of that, I got an interview. So it's kind of a twofer in both stopping a harmful message and then also getting a positive message in. Pamela, one comment I'm seeing that I'm not sure if you do is Kim had shared earlier a comment about Facebook and,
Yes.
and repercussions. And I just want to lift that up and read it out to folks and reflect on it with you, Pamela. That every posting on Facebook can cause even posting on Facebook can cause problematic repercussions. That's what Kim says. After posting several abortion support statements, someone turned me into Facebook and I was forced to change my gaming account to my real name. I had to submit identification and it was a real hassle, all because of my activism. So speaking up does have an impact. I just share this story in case you want to share it to warn others what Facebook might do. I didn't even know that they had this rule about using your real name on your account. Yeah, that Facebook rule is terrible because it's not safe for a number of reasons for people to use their real name. And that's something to be aware of. And I guess just my first reflection that I have actually goes back to something I said in the beginning, that not every action is safe for every person. And if you don't want to post about abortion on your social media accounts, for example, for whatever reason, it doesn't mean that someone who does is a better activist than you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And definitely, people who oppose abortion are in the everyday world. So when you're on Facebook or on Twitter, they're out there following along as well. And I've actually had friends for other reasons, but friends who had their Facebook account suspended. I actually had my Facebook account set up as my nickname, and I had it locked for 48 hours because somebody had complained, I guess, and I was blown away. I was like, seriously. And Facebook does not have an easy way to reach out to them, like they don't have phones or something. So it was very frustrating and very disheartening. So definitely think through that stuff and make sure that you've told people who are going to be participating in your action or are part of your organization to think through that as well. So Steph wanted to say that she never heard of the silence technique from journalists before. Thanks for sharing that. What are some other signs that a journalist is trying to get you to say something off message? Ooh, that's a good question. So silence is definitely the number one tactic. So saying something in a kind of friendly, conspiratory kind of way, like, oh gosh, that police chief is really horrible, isn't he? If you don't know the person, I usually don't assume some sort of bond. So I've actually had reporters kind of say comments that would be what I guess you would call like a dig or a leading question or comment. And after you do a direct action, your energy's up, your adrenaline is running, you're so excited and so kind of high on the moment that if everybody coming up and saying that was great and I'm so glad that they pushed that police car over, all of those things can sometimes be ways that they can get you off guard or get you to say something a little off color. The other thing I think that I've experienced with reporters is to kind of try to not necessarily being done in a devious way, but just try to work around to the question in a different way that will get you to answer what they really want you to answer. So you have to kind of not feel sorry for them, and it's not personal, but you're there to say what you need to say, and to relate what you need to relate, and you don't owe a reporter anything. So I've heard everything from I'm on deadline, come on help me out here, to I'm going to get in trouble if I don't come back with something. That's not your responsibility or appropriate for them to kind of put you in that position. So I think it's just important to remember that that a good reporter is a hungry reporter, and a good journalist is basically going to go after that bone, but that's not your role. That you're not there to do their job for them. You're there to give them give them information, and help them better understand the event. Thanks for that question, Steph. All right, so we are at 7 o'clock, and we try to be really good about ending on time here at Reproaction. So with that question, I'm going to thank Erin for an awesome idea and topic. I thought this was really helpful, and I hope everybody else did as well. And again, visit us at reproaction.org. You can email Erin at reproaction.org, or me, Pamela, at reproaction.org, and we hope to see you for the next Act and Learn webinar. If not, we'll see you in the streets. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.